As they wrap up the first fortnight, the PM wanting to talk about that theme of delivery and hitting the ground running.
Well, the government very much in the ascendancy. That's what I got out of the 2 weeks. I guess you'd expect that after they've had a thumping win, but it was pretty stark in question time the last fortnight.
Yeah, indeed. And today, though, the opposition leader's theme all about, and this has been, I think, the most repeated question about the power bill commitment. Now, the Prime Minister hasn't said they're not going to deliver it, but they're just not reiterating the fact that they're going to.
He's not reiterating it. I think it's dropped, and I think it's fair enough for the opposition to leap on it. But as I've been pointing out all week, because it's been the first question of question time all week, the government can argue where you hid a power price that was coming, which has some impact on that 15 to 20%, the determination handed down the week after the election. And Albanese uses this Dutton question here to prosecute what he says is the isolation of the opposition when all other parties have worked together on the climate bill this week.
I referred to the Prime Minister's promise to the families of Longford in the electorate of Lyons that, and I quote, "We've looked at measures that make a real permanent difference to cost of living." Will the Prime Minister apologise to Australians he's misled?
Indeed, in Longman and in electorates right around Australia, people are struggling with high power bills. And they're higher because of the failure of those opposite over 10 long years to implement...
Members on my left. Members on my left. The member for Latrobe.
To implement a policy.
And here's the PM more on that theme. He's had a good day in terms of the climate change legislation. Passing the House of Representatives, talk more about that in a second. Again, trying to present the image the Coalition and Peter Dutton are isolated, that they are of the past, the rest of the Parliament's about the future.
Remember when the Liberal Party used to have a relationship with business? Remember that? But what we saw today was just them isolated and alone, stuck in the same old trench, fighting a fight that has passed them by themselves with their arms crossed, just saying no, no, no. The coalition of yesterday, the no-alition of today. If he's offended by that, he should see what the business community is saying about them in private. He should have a chat. Have a chat to the National Farmers Federation or the Australian Industry Group about manufacturing or the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
The Prime Minister in question time. Now, the target for the government has been... Angus Taylor's copped a lot of the sprays, hasn't he, in the first couple of weeks? He's really copped it. Some of his questions have actually deserved it, I think. But here we're going to play a couple of excerpts. Jim Chalmers mentioning Groucho Marx, comparing him to Angus Taylor, oh dear. But the other refrain here from Anthony Albanese suggesting federal ICAC might look at Angus Taylor, clearly unparliamentary. It should have been withdrawn. Milton Dick, the Speaker, said he didn't hear it.
On some days, those opposite say they want to see the summit cancelled. On other days, they say that they demand an invitation to the Job Summit. On the 11th of July, they said both. On the 11th of July, they said both. It reminds me of what Groucho Marx said. Groucho Marx said he didn't want to be part of an organisation that would have him as a member. The member for Hume doesn't want to be part of a Job Summit that would have him as an attendee.
But we won't take lections of integrity from the shadow treasurer. Other bodies will deal with him.
The big focus, though, for today, in fact, for the first fortnight, has been the build-up and now the delivery through the House of Reps of the climate bill.
Yes, Kieran. So the climate change bill passed the House of Representatives early this afternoon. The first step in enshrining in law the government's target of reducing emissions by 43%. After some amendments from the Teal Independents and the Greens. What we saw this morning was a real sign of the looming influence of the so-called Teals in this parliament, moving a bunch of amendments that the government agreed to. One of them, Zali Steggall, claimed that her amendment meant a future government could not reverse the target, and there were several other amendments as independent after independent rose to move one. Have a look at some of the contributions.
This amendment aims to broaden the legislation beyond the setting of a number.
There is opportunity to go beyond the 43% cut in carbon emissions.
This amendment is one which will help ensure our climate policy will be kept on track, regardless of which major party may be in government.
then you need pollution cuts of 75%. That is crystal clear. That is the science.
So any change of governments, and I would call this our future insurance policy, that says that once an NDC has been made, it cannot be amended to go backwards.
The passage of the bill, 89 votes to 55, also appeared to solidify that Bridget Archer, the member for the marginal seat of Bass, is almost a teal Liberal. You'll see her here, sitting with the independents as she crossed the floor. Archer voted again against her side, as she did on religious freedom, as she indicated she would on federal ICAC under Scott Morrison, and now has done so on a more ambitious climate target.
But I will be supporting Labor's primary bill. At the end of the day, it's important to me that when I'm back in my own community, I'm able to sincerely say that I used the opportunity afforded to me with the power of my vote to stand up for what they want and need and to move on from this debate.
The PM says this legislation needs to be in law, as opposed to being a target with the UN like previous targets, to provide businesses certainty that they should invest in renewable energy. He was asked at his press conference this afternoon, how can he provide certainty when the opposition opposes it, and if the coalition is elected, they could renege on it?
You said your preference was to legislate targets to guarantee or generate business investment certainty, so have a legislated target. Do you accept that that certainty is still under a cloud while the alternative government doesn't adhere to your targets and may change them should they, or unlegislate them should they be elected?
Well, they're not acting much like an alternative government. They're acting like a permanent opposition. In my view, it will be very brave indeed for an alternative political party that seeks to govern, as opposed to a minor party, to say we're going to tear down the structures that have been put in place.
And key to this plan is the government saying you get from about 21% of our energy being from renewable energy to having 82% generated by that form of power in just 8 years. So I asked the PM just how this happens. How do you see us going from the 20% renewable energy being, the 20% of our energy being generated by renewables to more than 80% within 8 years? How do you see that rolling out?
I see when I talk to the business community, including the investors group, what they say is that there's investment has been in the pipeline that's been held back, because if you're going to invest in something that produces a return over a period of time but lasts for decades, not 4 years, then you need that investment certainty.
Well, that's a big test. A lot of transmission lines being installed is involved. We know that, and a lot of private sector investment. Now, we know opposition leader Peter Dutton has told his party room that he will take to the next election a stronger climate target than the 26 to 28% Scott Morrison took to the last poll. But it appears he is pinning some of that to backing in nuclear power. The opposition's Senate leader, Simon Birmingham, a moderate, told Kieran yesterday that it would be a much higher target and indicated he might have voted for the government's climate bill if it made any difference to Australia's target, which, as I said earlier, is already before the UN.
Well, Kieran, from my perspective, had the legislation been necessary for Australia to commit to a higher target, then I would have voted for it in a heartbeat. From our perspective, I look forward to us taking to the next election what I trust will be an ambitious agenda on climate change.
You're talking much more ambitious than 28%?
Absolutely, Kieran. I would expect that it has to be.